We're going to go ahead and get started because we have a huge and fantastic program for you today. And I know some of you are with us for the day, some of you are with us for a class period, but thank you for being here for the Emerson Prison Initiatives Conference. I'm Mneesha Gellman. I'm the founder and director of the Emerson Prison Initiative here at Emerson College. I'm also an associate professor of political science here. And it is such an honor to be with you and have the opportunity to share my perspective on some of the critical issues of our time. We're going to do a lot of different things today, okay? So pace yourself if you're here for the day. I want to just begin with a handful of thank yous, and there are more than I could enumerate all in one paragraph. But first to In Thrive Film Festival. Thank you for partnering with us. Come see their films tomorrow. We're going to be all day long in the Bright Screening Room from starting at 12 p.m. with films and panels with filmmakers and panelists throughout the day. Thanks to Inquest, the magazine of the Institute to End Mass Incarceration, for being a co-sponsor of our event in these next couple of days, and thanks to the Office of the Provost, and also the very large Emerson community of staff who made all of the logistics possible today. I want to give a huge shout out to Betsy Chase, who even now is logistically organizing, but applaud for Betsy. Thank you so much for making this conference be a reality, and also to Charles Rosario, our program coordinator, and to the entire EPI Advisory Council, many faculty and staff who gather on a monthly basis to serve as a governance mechanism for the Emerson Prison Initiative. We're really grateful, and Tamia and Crystal, two of our Advisory Council members, are out there running the registration table when you came in, so it is a village effort to do work like this. I want to take the time to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and I'm going to start with the land that formed me, where I grew up in what is now Northern California, the Yurok, Wiyot, Karuk, and Hupa people who continue their practice of native survivance there to this day. I acknowledge that I now live and work on the unceded land of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, Wampanoag people in what is now called Boston. As a non-Indigenous person, I recognize the politics of visibility, and my purpose in making this statement is at the beginning of 2 days gathered together to address issues of justice, to think about the politics of that in the very place where we are gathered. So I invite you to take a breath, remember the larger structural factors shaping the world, even as we gather to explore issues of social justice and racial justice here in this space. I invite us to take responsibility to intervene in violence in all its forms, through caring communities and structural change to build the world that we actually want to be in. With that, I'd like to now invite our Provost, Alex Socarides, up to kick us off with opening remarks. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Emerson Prison Initiative's 2025 Conference on College and Prison. I am thrilled to see so many people here today, and I'm looking forward to the incredible lineup of events that are in store for all of you over the next 2 days. As Mneesha said, my name is Alex Socarides, and I serve as the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs here at Emerson College. As some of you know, I am new to Emerson. This past summer I arrived here, and part of the pleasure of being new somewhere is that I get to experience everything for the first time with eyes wide open and a sense of curiosity about everything I encounter here at Emerson. I experience that in every classroom that I visit, in every conversation I have with faculty, staff, and students, in experiencing our two teach-ins, the teach-in on sustainability and the teach-in on race, on attending many films, readings, and performances of our amazing faculty, and now again here today with all of you, witnessing the work of staff, faculty, and students of the Emerson Prison Initiative. As some of you may also know, I came from the University of Missouri, but what you don't know is that while I was there, I worked for years with faculty, and one faculty member in particular who desperately was trying to start a college and prison program. It began as a small departmental initiative, and over the years grew into the possibility of a certificate program, But just despite my trying to navigate the ins and outs of the university's politics and bureaucracy with this faculty member, we could never get the approvals to move forward. So you might imagine my incredible delight when I learned that Emerson not only had one of the country's best prison and college programs, but that this initiative reported to the provost. I immediately set myself to learning all there was to know about EPI, its history, its leadership, its ambitions, and of course, its day-to-day workings. Over the last 8.5 months, I've gotten an education of my own in all things EPI. I've been to MCI Norfolk twice, once on a kind of delegation of administrators, and once to sit in on Wendy Walters' class. I have met with the EPI Advisory Council. I like to tell people that Charles Rosario was my first official staff hire upon becoming provost on day 2 in the job. And I meet monthly with Mneesha Gellman, your totally fearless leader who advocates at every turn for what EPI needs to serve its students best. So I want to begin by saying how incredibly impressed I have been by the work that EPI does, and by taking a moment to acknowledge how amazing it is that Emerson College gets the chance to do this work. Let me also highlight a few things about just how important this work is at this moment. In this challenging national and global moment, EPI provides a concrete intervention with proven track record in addressing structural injustice. EPI represents a vibrant commitment to civic engagement and addressing real social issues through the tools of higher education. EPI exemplifies a space where Emerson translates theories about our core values into action. EPI reminds us that change is possible, that our institution can do something, both structurally and individually, to foster change. In short, we do this work because it matters, and it matters all the more at moments like this one. The nuances of how it matters, or what that mattering translates into, or how we can do more of it, or do it even better, these are the things we will learn about over the next 2 days. And once again, I thank you for being here. Let me end by saying again how much I appreciate the exemplary work of the EPI leadership, and on behalf of myself and President Bernhardt, I express deep gratitude to them and to everyone involved in the Emerson Prison Initiative for your remarkable and transformative efforts and actions. I hope you all enjoy the conference. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Provost Socarides. That was wonderful, and I just have to say how gratifying it is to be here in community with you all at this particular moment in time, and as you said, get to come together to celebrate the way in which we can impact change. And I'm also appreciative to my colleagues, other faculty that brought your classes here today so that students can have access to this and many other conference panels that we have throughout the day. So I'm going to do something out of character, which is read my talk, and that's in part because there's so many things that I want to say. I had to organize myself, so I will be less spontaneous than I usually am as a speaker. I'm going to, not touch the laptop. I'll use the clicker. I'm going to talk about college and prison as an ethical imperative, talk about educational access as a structural, as an intervention in structural discrimination, and focus a bit on redefining public safety. And I'll probably not talk about that as much as I should, so I'll just flag it as something that could be good to circle back to in the Q&A. I'll talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have discussion time. I'm going to just spend 1 minute pausing to see if there's any way I can see more of you. There we go, from behind the podium. I'm almost tempted to move there with the laptop, but I think it's going to make it too confusing, so I'll just ignore it. Okay, and I'll talk about the EPI as a case study in the end of the talk. I want to begin with the terminology that I'm going to use. And I know that I have lost the fight nationally about not equating prison education with education in prison. The term prison education has become codified in a number of spaces, and I disagree with it as a term. And since it's my conference, I'm going to take a minute to tell you about why that is and encourage you to consider using the term education in prison instead. Prison education refers to what prison staff teach. People who are Department of Corrections employees determine that educational curriculum, and they implement it and they assess it on their own terms. Education in prison refers to a standard benchmark of education by outside educational institutional standards and is implemented by people outside of that system. So I don't see that they are identical terms, even though I recognize they're used interchangeably by a lot of people. I do use the term education in prison to mean something distinct, and those of you that might find yourselves writing about this work or involved in discussing it in more depth, I would just encourage you to think about those terminological choices and what they signify. Similarly, the Emerson Prison Initiative has done a lot of thinking about the language that we use to talk about people who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. On our website, under the Resources tab, we have a language guide. We might have a handful of printed copies of the language guide here on our table over there on the sidewall as well. We avoid terms like prisoner or convict or felon or other things that talk about people only in relation to their criminal history. We use terms like someone who is a person who is incarcerated or incarcerated person, either identity first or person first language, to ascribe agency, an ability to have free will and be defined by something larger than someone's carceral status to refer to them. So again, I encourage you to think about the way that language is power and how we want to use that power responsibly through our words. Okay, so now it's not advancing. There we go. Now we are. Okay. I'm going to begin with a national and international view on this topic, and then I'll get to the case study of EPI. In my scholarship, which is related but separate from my role as director of the program, I focus on how we teach in prison and who is teaching and being taught. Today, I want to focus on the why. Why do we teach college in prison? A central thread that runs through my work as a college in prison professor and administrator is about authority and who has the power to speak in the classroom. In this book that I edited that came out in 2022, Education Behind the Wall, Why and How We Teach College in Prison, the authors present different techniques for sharing authority and legitimating students' lived experiences as valid sources of knowledge. From Stephen Shane's reflections on authority and voice in college writing, to Kim McLaren and Wendy Walter's case for creative expression as a right, regardless of circumstance, to Kara Moyer Duncan and Tina Dent's 2 chapters on program implementation and library access. If you leave here wanting to know more about the how of what we do, the book was designed to be a resource. It's a book that I've given away to programs across the US and gone to give talks at other college and prison programs elsewhere for folks that are looking to better understand the how of what we do. The book overall makes the case that a college education can be transformative personally, socially, and intergenerationally. College in general works as an interrupter, as a means to break away from the status quo. When educators and administrators center incarcerated student voices, the authors and I assert that access to education subverts social hierarchies that keep some people oppressed to the benefit of others. In this way, the volume focuses on power, which is a concept at the heart of carceral studies. In my second edited volume, Unlocking Learning, International Perspectives on Education in Prison, co-edited with Justin McDevitt, who is in the Midwest and runs his own program there, we survey education in prison as a global intervention with local impact, with chapters, case studies on Austria, Norway, the Netherlands, Slovakia, Poland, Italy, Mexico, El Salvador, and the United States. In that book, most authors provide country overviews, including how many people are currently being held in prison and jails in those case studies, what is known about the makeup of the population in a particular country compared to the general population, what is the average sentence length, and in what kinds of conditions is it being served. In our introduction and conclusion, Justin and I offer a snapshot of global incarceration that helps make sense of the role of education in prisons and jails comparatively. He's also a comparative political scientist. What we find is that too many people are locked up, but the conditions under which they are confined and their educational access can be quite deterministic of life success after prison, and this varies tremendously place to place. The extent and quality of educational access in prisons both shape and are shaped by the broader prison context. While incarceration is universally a restriction on some degree of freedom, of whether it's of movement or choice in daily life, the experience of incarceration varies widely from place to place. Critical factors such as justice sector policies, vulnerability to gang and cartel control, and private versus public management, along with many other factors, all influence the way that prisons and jails operate. Many people who work on education in prison have to wrestle with what the purpose of prison is in the first place. And I know many of you in this room sit with this reflection. Incarceration, in its many iterations, is a global strategy to address transgression by removing transgressors from society. Imprisonment claims to be a public safety strategy that decreases crime and increases security. Yet there's a robust literature on the criminogenic, meaning crime-producing, nature of prisons themselves, not just in the US, but globally. At least in the United States, in the literature on this country, we see that prisons actually cause more crimes than they solve. Some form of education is always offered in prison. In the absence of formal educational programming, incarceration creates opportunities for people to learn crime-enabling tips and techniques from each other. And this is documented in the literature. This is not my opinion. This is something that other scholars have done studies about. We know that formal education levels of those entering prison are lower than the average non-incarcerated citizen, reinforcing connections between class, lack of formal educational access, involvement with the carceral system, and underground economies. Danielle Sered, in her book from a few years ago about restorative justice, titled Until We Reckon, says, "We know the 4 core drivers of violence are shame, isolation, exposure to violence, and an inability to meet one's economic needs. The 4 core features of prison are shame, isolation, exposure to violence, and an inability to meet one's economic needs. And so we have baked into our central response to violence in this country precisely the things that we know generate it. Such conclusions add evidence that prisons are either disingenuous or ineffective in their purported attempts to reduce crime. In other words, prisons exist to do something else entirely rather than rehabilitate." Across the world today, there's an estimated 10.7 million people confined in prisons and jails. And just to put that into global context, there's about as many people in prison in the world as there are in the entire state of North Carolina, which is the 9th most populous state in the US, or in Greece, which is the 89th most populous country in the world. Just trying to help you visualize that. A full quarter of the people incarcerated in the world are incarcerated in the United States, even though the US has only 5% of the world's total population. After the United States, top incarcerators in terms of sheer numbers are China, Brazil, India, and Russia. But as a portion of the population, El Salvador has become the top incarcerator, with more than 2% of its population locked up since its slide into authoritarianism accelerated in 2022. And I just have to say, as an aside, I co-published an article last night on the conversation about the conditions that people being deported from the US will face if when they arrive in El Salvador and are put into the prison system there. So if you're interested in that issue, you can look up that article on the conversation. Recent data shows that approximately 93% of incarcerated people in the world are male, though the percentage of incarcerated women across the globe has risen steadily in the last 25 years. Likewise, the vast majority, roughly 95% of people incarcerated, are citizens of the country in which they are in prison, but the share of incarcerated people who are foreign-born rises to about 8% in the Americas and more than 22% in Europe. So there's some geographic variation in terms of where it's majority citizens incarcerated and other populations. Without overly idealizing them, Norway has some of the lowest rates of incarceration and recidivism in the world, and prisons in the Netherlands sit nearly empty because people have been channeled away from incarceration and instead towards support for transgressions reframed as public health issues. These pragmatic solutions to what drives violence in the first place, unequal access to insufficient resources, get people support they need and avoid incarceration altogether. The US could do this, but it would require a robust social safety net, and at the moment, even the little one we have is being decimated in the name of efficiency. So early childhood intervention, like Head Start and other programs with documented track records of supporting the working class, are being eliminated as we speak. These are issues of political will. In the United States, punitive justice, meaning punishment, reigns rather than preventative models, which seek to intervene before harm has been caused, or restorative models, rebuilding relationships after harm. And I know we have a few experts in this room, folks from the Transformational Prison Project and others that work extensively on this. As long as we take militarized approaches to social problems, public safety is jeopardized. This is particularly true in the realm of immigration, and I'm gonna deviate from my main theme to talk about this for one slide because it's so much a part of what I do when I'm not working on EPI. The criminalization of immigration, or crimmigration is the term that has been made from those two terms, from places in the global south, such as Central America, facing insecurity, and sometimes US-made insecurity, if we look historically, conflates a civil violation with crime. Civil violations, meaning which refers to entering or being in the US without authorization, which violates civil code rather than criminal code, have led to family separation and other punishments that are deeply traumatic and have long-lasting effects. As undocumented immigration violates civil and not criminal code, it's worth considering if the violation is in proportion to the punishment. Since January 20th of this year, the dehumanization of immigrants by the new administration highlights how crucial it is to stand up and stand by our values for justice and address root causes of social problems rather than addressing Band-Aid solutions or even the lack of that. It's important to know our history, and I'm a political scientist that emphasizes the historical situatedness of any political problem is really vital. And on this topic, to query why do societies use prisons and what do they want from them? What is the purpose of this particular social arrangement? Michel Foucault points out in his book Discipline and Punish, justice was once paid for with pain, not rather than isolation. In the majority of democratic regimes, the assumption, and sorry, I'm gonna pause there to say, in the past, people would be drawn and quartered, there would be public graphic displays of the bodies of people who had committed crimes, so it was a public spectacle rather than a taking people and sequestering them out of the public eye. So there's really been a shift in the way that punishment has been handled over multiple generations, over centuries, I'm referring to here. Oops, this computer just logged out. PJ, if someone can save me. The laptop logged out. In the majority of democratic regimes, the assumption is that people are in prison because society, voters, want them there. Indeed, in the United States, fluctuations in incarceration levels can best be understood as the result of politicians responding to changes in the level of punitiveness in society at large. So why this punitiveness? Sometimes punitiveness, thank you, is informed by outright racism, and there's a strong literature explaining this. There we go. And the focus on social control often has to do with this focus on controlling the other. The other, quote unquote, is regularly presented as dangerous throughout history and certainly in our contemporary times. And I'm just going to give a little bit of historical context. In the aftermath of the Civil War over slavery in the US, the criminalization of black bodies through black codes became a way to perpetuate white supremacy. Then convict leasing evolved as an economic mechanism to maintain white profit from black labor after slavery was made illegal. The racial panic in the US that ushered in skyrocketing incarceration rates was a backlash to the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. So African American people gained a significant amount of rights, and the proportion of incarceration of the people with those rights increased too. It's not a coincidence. It's a historical pattern looking at the othering of Black, Indigenous, and people of color bodies throughout US history. White grievances about immigrants and demands to incarcerate and deport them became more vociferous in the aftermath of the 1994 North American Free Trade Agreement, which is this tipping point in economic globalization where many US manufacturing businesses went offshore and folks who previously had a blue-collar path to the middle class in the United States lost that access. At that point, we see a shift in the rhetoric where this increased dehumanization of immigrants came to dominate the public vernacular. So for me, this raises questions about what is criminalized and who is it enforced against. Even as presidents like Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan in the 1970s and 80s leveraged racist sentiments in public to shepherd the passage of stricter drug laws and sentencing guidelines, which were then disproportionately enforced against marginalized communities, members of communities hit hardest by these tougher penalties sometimes supported them because they were also hit hardest by the crimes themselves, and sometimes they didn't, which is to say it's complex who is in support of and who is against the way that punishments are distributed. Viewed in this way, prisons in the United States do not always serve the function of punishment, but instead are used as a tool to deliver policy responses to other social forces, such as racial resentment, poverty, mental health, addiction, and many more. With the advent of mass incarceration in the United States, and mass incarceration refers to this large-scale warehousing of humans, there's been a pivot away from a rehabilitative ideal to a more punitive posture. People win elections with tough on crime, lock 'em up approaches, and so being seen as soft on crime has continually been seen as a political liability. In other democracies, especially in some of the European case studies, the rehabilitative ideal continues to thrive and remains a linchpin of penal philosophy and a way to maintain social order by addressing root causes of issues as public health issues, as I mentioned before. At the same time, it's acknowledged that while incarceration itself is undoubtedly a form of punishment, loss of liberty is the maximum amount of punishment appropriate and should be applied in the least damaging way. So loss of liberty rather than torture of the body. Again, this evolution over generations that has happened globally. Many people claim that incarceration as practiced in the United States represents valid policy to address transgressions, yet it doesn't hold up to scrutiny under democratic principles or international law in some cases. Which public is served by the current approach to public safety in the United States? We know the answer is whiter, wealthier publics. Even though those same communities may use drugs at higher rates than BIPOC communities, they are far less frequently imprisoned for it. BIPOC and working class communities are disproportionately represented in prisons, so the question of safety for whom has intersectional implications. My safety may not be the same as your safety, and that disparity is a problem. And the film that our EPI alum Mac Hudson is screening later this afternoon, Mississippi, will speak directly to this. So if you're able, I hope you can join us for that. In more authoritarian regimes, while prisons ostensibly are there to enforce public order, there's no underlying assumption that they do so primarily for the public good. We see this right now in El Salvador, where the incarceration of more than 84,000 people under the state of exception over the last 3 years under the pretense of reducing gang control has in fact led to an increase of state perpetrators in many communities and a continuation of human security with different actors. Throughout history, in authoritarian and democratic regimes alike, prisons have been used to silence political dissidents, to oppress minority populations, and threaten the general public into submission. I'm just going to keep talking. It's okay. That does not meet my definition of maintaining public safety, which I take to mean something that fosters well-being for all people in a given community, safety from harm, and the right to live a full life. So what can be done? As you are here for an Emerson Prison Initiative conference, you know that I'm going to talk about education as an intervention, and so I am going to turn to that next. I want to say at the outset that I acknowledge there's no one way to do college and prison. Every state and county, every region is going to, just like every college and university, is going to have a different approach to this. And as the provost mentioned in her remarks, different college and university contexts are going to lead to different opportunities. We're constrained by the institutions in which we work, so not every program is going to look the same. But I do think that there's a handful of universals that I want to offer up for consideration. Being humble, being well organized, being willing to iteratively reflect and change rather than digging in on there being one way to do a program are useful baseline characteristics to be able to work across Department of Correction partners and college and university partners, as well as students who are the lifeblood of programs like this. And really focusing on a commitment to social change, I think, across all those programs types is something that we find when we go to conferences like the Alliance for Higher Education and Prison Conference, and people are doing lots of different kinds of college and prison work. That's something that binds us together. Across carceral systems, access to education for people who are incarcerated continues to be an impactful intervention. Higher education, which refers to college or university level coursework, has an outstanding track record as an interventionist tool. Completing a higher education degree while incarcerated, so an associate's or a bachelor's degree, dramatically reduces the chance of returning to prison within 3 years of release, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Credentials make upward social and economic mobility more plausible. Even if it's not guaranteed, it makes it much more plausible. So if someone is able to earn a degree inside, they're able to put that degree to work in a way that opens doorways to upward and social and economic mobility. Recidivism, which refers to the rate of return to prison after release, should be one of many metrics, not the only metric, to evaluate the utility of expanding educational access to people in prison. Education also promises, in addition to being a recidivism reduction mechanism, it also promises self-actualization, which colleagues, myself included, argue should be an important metric in this work. Not only keeping people out of prison, but the ability to learn who we are in the world is a worthy goal. And you can tell I'm a liberal arts professor when I say that, right? For people serving long-term or life sentences, educational access provides meaning, dignity, and autonomy in prison. This doesn't justify long sentences, but it highlights that educational access brings positive outcomes whether or not someone is going to be released. And I have worked really hard for this in my own program to make sure that we can include people as students regardless of sentence length. When we talk about recidivism as the only metric, it can limit us to only providing education for people who are going to get out of prison during their working life. But in fact, there are people serving life sentences for whom access to college is deeply meaningful, and it's really important to me and to EPI that we talk about them as well. Despite the acknowledged benefits to education in prison, expanding such access requires navigating a host of bureaucratic and political barriers. College and prison programs operate at the behest of departments of correction, and we're grateful for their partnership. And I actually realized, I think I forgot to thank the Department of Correction colleagues in my opening remarks, but I want to thank them. And I see one of our long-term partners sitting here in this room. We couldn't do this work without you. We are profoundly appreciative of your work in helping us be able to bring college inside. We recognize that many of the things we ask these departments to do across the US. For example, bringing in large amounts of books and paper, enabling offline laptop access, moving students around on particular schedules are not the things that prisons are set up to do necessarily, and may be additional workloads for correctional staff. This requires mutual flexibility and goodwill, and it's a dance of diplomacy all the time, which we recognize. Funding these programs is another labor, and I'm very proud to say that Emerson College has been providing tuition remission, meaning free tuition, to incarcerated students since the program began, and also contributing some of the costs to make the program run. I do a lot of fundraising to make up the rest of that funding, and so if you're interested in talking about fundraising, talk to me after this talk. So what does an education in prison that is connected to intentions of self-transformation rather than punishment look like? In the books I edited, my authors and I examine educational programs in both the US and global contexts, and we find that societal prioritization of rehabilitation over punishment is a defining value from which many policy decisions flow. Let's see, let me make sure I'm on track with my slides. There we go. Best practices established within this field include prioritizing full-time, credit-bearing curricula that adhere to the same standards as traditional college academics, and not using a deficit approach, meaning centered on what students are lacking in shaping programs. And so the point here, and what EPI has tried to do, is to mimic as identically as possible the curricular pathway to a BA for incarcerated students as we do on the Boston campus. And I'm proud to say I think we do that, and we do it pretty well in a way that other programs are trying to figure out how to take on and adapt to their own circumstances. So I don't know if my tech folks can help the video run, but this was the place in the talk where we were gonna have a video interlude. So I don't know if that is queued up. Okay, I'll keep going while it's getting queued up just for the sake of time. So for those of you that don't know, EPI started in 2017. In 2016, we ran a guest lecture series at Massachusetts Correctional Institute of Concord to do relationship building between Emerson College and the Department of Correction. We also wanted to gauge interest among incarcerated folks to know if there was going to be interest in doing the program. And from there, we gained momentum. So by 2017, we ran admissions, enrolled our first cohort of students. Great. If it works to do, we'll have a 3-minute video interlude that will give you a little bit of a overview, and then I'll come back to talking. Thank you so much. The computer timed out again up here, but I'm gonna keep talking, and my wonderful tech team will save me. So EPI started, as I said, in 2017, and I want to talk for a minute just about admissions. I can't advance slides anymore, but I'm just gonna roll with it. So admissions happens through a selective process, as it does on the Boston campus. We have, let's see, okay, it's no longer showing on the laptop. There we go. We usually have between 50 and 100 applicants for 20 seats. So we admit students in cohorts of 20, which means there's a lot of folks that don't make it, and that is hard, but we encourage people to continue preparing and to apply again, and we have admitted people a second or a third time around that didn't necessarily get in the first time. When people are admitted to the Emerson Prison Initiative in prison, they become Emerson College students. So they are admitted as full students of the college. They accumulate their credits on Emerson College transcripts, and they're working towards a group degree in media, literature, and culture. So we've taken the media studies track and the literary studies track and all of our general education requirements at the college and packaged those together as this particular bachelor's degree. And for our subsequent cohorts, after our first cohort, we also added a minor in economics based on student interest. There was a lot of interest in the econ classes, and so we've created that minor as well. So since we started, we've admitted 60 students. We're getting ready this coming June to have the graduation of our next 7 graduates. So I want to give them a round of applause. Shout out to our upcoming grads. We're very excited for that commencement in June, and I will say we will have an open reception here on Emerson College on June 17th. So if you're in the community and you want to get to come celebrate our grads, not behind the wall, but here in public, you're invited to join us for that. We will also run admissions for a 4th cohort in the prison this coming spring, so we're getting ready to go in on Friday and do our first information session for that to help folks get oriented for what it would mean to apply. Where we are now at MCI Norfolk is not where we started. So we started at MCA Concord. That prison was closed this past June, and the Department of Correction relocated us from MCA Concord to MCI Norfolk just under 2 years ago. So we've been at MCI Norfolk since, and that's the largest men's medium security facility in the state. I also want to mention that we run a reentry program here at Emerson College called the EPI's Reentry and College Outside Program, which works to do one-on-one case management with folks as they're leaving prison, so supporting them across the range of bureaucratic processes that people are navigating when they get out, and connecting them into various supportive networks that can help people make that positive transition. And we will have a bunch of our alums featured on panels throughout the day, and also just mixing and mingling here in the conference. So please feel free to ask questions of the panelists and be engaged with them, because it's part of the process as we learn to talk about this work and its value. And I'm so honored with the work that our alums are doing and the positive impact that EPI Recoup is having. I want to talk I know my time is running out. I'm conscious I want to give us time for discussion too, but still have a handful more slides, so bear with me. College and prison operates as this form of resistance to hierarchical forms of knowledge control by expanding the limits of what can be known and by whom it can be known. EPI illustrates that it's possible to establish knowledge production for incarcerated students and professors at similar levels of authority. College and prison is at the forefront of expanding voices included in systems of social prison, but it's complicated, so why do we do it? And I said previously, prison is one way to respond to social transgressions, but what are the resources and the methodologies that we need to re-envision public safety in the first place? I mentioned the Norwegian model and the Netherlands decarceration rates before. I want to emphasize that investment in healthy communities, doing violence intervention work, diversion from prison, comprehensive mental health services, and humane and dignifying circumstances of incarceration, which is also part of the Norwegian case study, are ways to make communities safer. It's not just touchy-feely work, it's actually fundamentally addressing public safety. Resource redistribution is part of that, and I encourage us to consider what that means politically, not just now, but throughout the course of our lives. How can we be advocates and speak up for that? And I also want to touch on this question of, oops, sorry, I'm a slide behind, I got thrown off there. How can we work with and in prisons when we see that prisons themselves globally can cause so much harm? Many people in the college and prison field struggle to balance abolitionist views or very critical views about the prison system with the reality of system compliance. I want to underscore that college and prison programs are not meant to be prison augmenting. We're not trying to make mass incarceration prettier in some way or make it more justifiable, but we are really looking at the way that bringing access to higher education, bringing access to higher education for incarcerated people is fundamentally re-envisioning how society operates. It is system-level change. So I push back. Sometimes I get questions of like, oh, aren't you're just reformist, you're working with the system and all that. Yes, we are. We're system compliant, but we're doing it as we fundamentally imagine a different kind of system. To provide access to a college degree for someone that did not previously had access to that is deeply questioning the roots of the system itself. Until we implement a radically new public safety paradigm in the US, people will continue to live their lives in confinement, and so people can, right now, in this moment, live their sentences with college access or without it. And for that reason, I say we're going to be in compliance with the system. We're going to work with our DOC partners to make sure that people do have access to college if they are eligible for it and want it. And that takes a lot of work. So why bother? Why is college in prison worth the labor it takes? I said before, it's not just recidivism reduction, because that does miss the point of higher ed's true power. But for people who want the bipartisan-friendly talking points about the economics of prison, I do want to offer a few of those here. Recidivism, returning to prison, happens about 50% of the time nationwide. That means so about half the people who leave prison will return to prison in 3 years. In Massachusetts, it's lower, and it's continuing to drop. So I think in the 2020s, right now, we're at about 26% recidivism. That's come down since when EPI started. We were closer to 34% in this state. So that is significantly lower than the national average. But for people who earn a BA in prison, the recidivism rate is between 2 and 4%, and of those documented cases, those are for technical parole violations, not for new crimes. So the intervention of bringing education into prison dramatically drops the rate at which people return. And it makes a lot of sense because you get your college degree, and if you come out of prison, you're going to become employed at Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, or Transformational Prison Project, or ROCA, or UTEC, or EPI, or any of these other amazing organizations, right? And you're not doing things that are going to bring you back to prison. Instead, you're doing things to help other young folks stay out of prison. So it's a deep systemic intervention. There are also big tax implications by that intervention, right? So we know it costs, I think the most recent stat I saw was about $130,000 a year on average, and there's lows and highs of that, but the average cost is about $130,000 per person per year to incarcerate someone in Massachusetts. Even at a school like Emerson, which we know is not cheap, this is still more expensive to incarcerate than it is to get an Emerson education. So it's a very expensive tax burden to incarcerate folks, and educational access impacts that. College and prison programs both reduce recidivism and provide these transformational experiences that assist students in making meaning out of their past, present, and future. So I'm concluding, and I want to go back to the 3 initial questions that I put up in the very beginning of the talk. Why do we teach in prison? How do we teach in prison? And who is teaching and being taught? And here are my answers for you. We teach because college helps people self-actualize, something any society needs for an intellectual and creative life. And it helps people get jobs in the formal economy, stay out of prison, and contribute to their communities in healthy ways. It does work on multiple fronts. We teach because college and prison is an effective intervention in these multiple ways, and we teach in ways that affirm dignity and autonomy of our students. We give choices whenever possible. We try to minimize assumptions. We solicit feedback on what we teach and how we teach it. We use the same Emerson course evaluation that students on the Boston campus are asked to do at the end of every course. We bring that in paper form. Students fill it out at the end of every course. We bring it back. We have a devoted staff member, devoted as in they are devoted to doing this semester after semester. It takes a lot of time and effort, but they actually manually enter those course evals into the online system so that faculty get that feedback the same way that we do from teaching our Boston classes. We recognize that as educators and non-incarcerated people, we frequently take turns being the students. A willingness to recognize the limitations of our own expertise, coupled with the immense life experience of incarcerated students, means that no one person has a monopoly on knowledge. And we teach as we would teach anywhere, to share our subject matter craft, to help people grow their understanding of the world, and to participate in co-creating a better world that we imagine together. So thank you for listening to all of that, and we have a little bit of time for questions, I think. Okay. So we have these roving microphones, I think if Betsy and maybe if there's one other volunteer, and because we are live streaming this, so hi to everyone that's live streaming, if people are able to wait for the mic to ask their questions, that would be great so that we get everything on the mic. So just feel free to give it a wave. And we have panels throughout the day, so maybe you have a question that's not a me question, but if you have a question that is a question for me, this is your moment to do that. Otherwise, there's gonna be lots of other fabulous panels coming up. Introduce yourself too, please.
Right, so good morning, I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge, the Senate Chair of the Criminal Justice Reform, and thank you so much, Mneesha, Emerson Prison Initiative. It's great to see so many friends and allies. I was just curious in terms of the, if there's a breakdown or analysis of those that graduate from the program, what types of jobs people go into. because that would be really helpful, because we are trying to do a lot of work at the state level to provide more support for reentry and investment. But just curious if there's any data on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here, Senator Eldridge, and thank you for that question. So we so far are a small N program, right? We have a fairly small number of graduates. So I can talk about what our graduates do, but then also try to offer perspective on the larger state as a whole. So our graduates, for the most part, have gone back into violence prevention and intervention work. So the majority so far in the 8 years of our program's existence, the majority of folks who have completed their degrees and left prison have been really interested in using their lived experience to try to interrupt cycles of violence. So we have, let's see, where's David? We had David Baxter is employed at Roca and has started at Roca from the beginning and is working his way up through Roca. Charles Rosario started out at UTEC when he first came back. Mac Hudson is in Prisoners Legal Services in Massachusetts. So a lot of the organizations like that have been spaces of employment for our grads. But we recognize that that is not the work that everyone wants to do. And we were talking earlier over breakfast about who wants to choose to continue to live their own story of incarceration, of being system impacted in some way in the work that they do. And not everyone wants to make that choice. So not everyone wants to use the authority about lived experience in their employment day to day. So some people may want to study in careers that have nothing to do with that. We don't yet have those data points because that hasn't been our population. But I will say that for folks who don't complete their education when they're inside, we are trying to support them to continue their degrees when they come out. So Emerson College has had 4 different students come from the prison to the Boston campus to continue to work towards their degrees. 2 of them have graduated with them. Ahmad Bright, who was featured in the film, actually transferred to Columbia University a while back, so he wanted to pursue a BA in economics, which we don't offer here at Emerson, so he went to Columbia. I mean, I think beyond the specific kinds of jobs, some of the most important things we can do in Massachusetts is address Corey-friendly employment. So how are criminal background checks being handled by employers? And what are the ways that things like record sealing is happening? What are the ways that employers are being educated about the impact of someone's sentence on their ability to work? So I think reducing stigma is the number one thing that we want employers to look at. We don't want to say these specific fields are for people who are formerly incarcerated. We want as many fields as possible to be open to them, but to do that, we have to reduce the stigma that people are coming out of prison with. I want to just see if there's some, an EPI alum or anyone else connected to our immediate EPI family that wants to speak to that question, though I don't know if anyone else feels like they could, speak to it. pass the mic, Oliver? Oliver?
Oh, it's okay. Hello, Reiko, Hillier, Lewis and Clark College. Thank you. I know I have to read your second book, or I don't know which came first, but the comparative book for this question. But since we have you here, I wonder if you could tell us if you found any correlation in countries like Russia and China that have higher prison rates than let's say, the Scandinavian countries, if there is any correlation between their punitiveness in terms of incarceration rates and what education they might offer. Because my research has shown that sometimes it's counterintuitive, that sometimes really harsh prisons offer leniency in other ways that we might not be able to parse. And so I wonder what some of those other places do as far as higher education in prison, if anything.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So we don't have Russia or China as a case study in that book. The United States is perhaps the case study that is the most obvious answer there. And there's a chapter by Max Kenner, who's the founder of the Barred Prison Initiative, in that book that talks about the history of college access in the U.S. And I think in that way, the U.S. is an interesting case because it has the highest rate, like the most widespread use of incarceration, but also the largest number of higher ed in-prison programs I think in the world. I'm scared to say that because I haven't totally triple fact-checked it. But so what is it about a system that is so willing to use incarceration and use this punitive approach, but also willing to partner with education programs? I think that is something I'm better able to speak to. Cases like China and Russia and El Salvador, places that are non-democracies and are using incarceration as a political tool in connection with that non-democratic status, there is not an impetus to open the door to education, because that education for self-actualization goal is terrifying in a non-democratic context, right? It opens the door to people thinking freely and then thinking critically about their surroundings, and that can be a threat to those systems. So those are not case studies that we looked at in the book. The ones where there was the most space for that kind of transformative, self-actualizing education to happen were cases where there was the most interest in restorative, rehabilitative relationship mending. Going back to Senator Eldridge's question, the destigmatization point to immediately from incarceration into the workforce. Like, what do we need to be able to set people onto different paths when they come home, destigmatizing. So I think it would be very interesting, and I know that there is a book that just came out that Aaron Corbett edited that has a whole bunch of other case studies that we don't include, and there's a second volume I think that's going to come out next year, but I don't know if people have been able to gain access to those particular cases to be able to answer that question better, but it's a good one. I see a question there.
Hi, I'm Amy Benjamin. I'm a mentor and mentor coordinator with Partakers, and we have the great privilege of working with EPI students as they journey through their bachelor's degree. Our mentor teams accompany and support them. And Mneesha, I was thinking about what you said about your small n, in a way, of impact while we are envisioning and hopefully also working towards this larger societal shift, which will take a great shift and many efforts. And I think about our mentoring work as well. We are supporting our mentees. We are also ourselves transformed by our work. It opens windows to life experience and to the
Where do we have the second mic?
Thank you. We are transformed ourselves, and we are, as mentors go out into our families and communities, we are agents with new eyes, but it is all a one-to-one-to-one. And so the question that I want to ask is sort of what's your vision for some of the mechanisms for this bigger societal shift? Where does it start? Where does it take place? How do we participate in it without losing sight of the beauty of our small n as well?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Amy, and thank you for the work that Partakers does. For folks that don't know, because EPI is a college program, we provide college. We don't necessarily provide all of the socio-emotional support that college students benefit from having. And so organizations like Partakers, where mentor teams are matched with incarcerated college students and are able to meet with them during visiting hours, really provides a kind of socio-emotional support that would otherwise be unavailable for a lot of students. Some people have very strong family networks and are able to get that from their families, but not everybody does. So we see the small N work that Partakers does, like what we do, as something that has big ripple effects, right? And so when one person is able to become grounded and to feel cared for, that ripples out to other people in their circles. I think for me, there's a number of things that we can do, and this relates back to destigmatizing. I think as a society, we need to reduce the stigma on what it means to have served prison time at all. I mean, first of all, I think we need to change the way that public safety operates so that fewer people are going into prison in the first place, and I laid that out in the talk. But I think starting from the reality, if someone has served time, how do we give them the space to talk about that as a source of strength, as a source of lived experience that makes them an authority in certain spaces, and be able to use that to do the kind of violence intervention work that so many of our alumni have gone on to do now. The shame that is packaged with someone's carceral history has deeply negative impacts, and we see that time and time again, whether it's people that don't want to share the fact that they're formerly incarcerated, or that their system impacted, that maybe someone they love in their life has served time. The way that those secrets fester, they lead to people feeling like imposters. We talk a lot about imposter syndrome in this field as people shift parts of their identities. So I think that normalizing the fact that someone might have lived experience in the system or be system impacted is really important. And then thinking about how can that be framed as a resource to put them in the situation of doing community-based work or structural work, bringing their perspective with them. So not needing to check it at the door, not needing to leave that experience behind, but tapping that experience as a resource that gives them authority to speak in certain spaces. And I've seen that on display time and time again in the Boston area in various spaces, whether it's in, Senator Eldridge and others hold hearings, and people with lived experience are able to give voice to things that those of us as administrators or educators might be able to say, but it's gonna come from a different place, it's gonna come in a different way. That work is critical. I also think that scaling up of this work is important, and EPI is excited to be scaling up. So we started, we've started slowly in terms of cohorts of 20 now and then. So we did admissions in 2017, 2021, 2023. We're moving towards an every other year admissions schedule where we hope to be able to regularly be running admissions, and that means regularly holding commencements and graduating people. We were also selected for a grant where we're packaging some of our own program instruments to provide technical assistance to other programs that are looking to do best practices in college and prison work. So I think there is the possibility of scaling the work itself, but we have to scale the destigmatization, and we have to scale the notion that the way that public safety is operating in the United States is not keeping everybody safe the way that it needs to. So what do we have to shift in that framework to get to a public safety that is long-term sustainable public safety for everyone regardless of their identity? Thank you. We do have a little bit more time. I'll let us end early so we can mix and mingle, but I would take a handful more questions if there are.
Hey everybody, my name is Marshall Lane. I'm the Boston Regional Coordinator for a company called MORE, Massachusetts Organization for Addiction Recovery. The reason I'm speaking is because I'm speaking from a place of experience. I was incarcerated 2008, drug-related, and the time that I spent in prison, it was, I guess the word would be like suffocating, right? And I craved knowledge. Now, there was a program in the prison I was at through Marist College in New York, because I was in the feds. And for some reason, I didn't qualify for that program. But what I did is my family helped me with some classes. And then a professor that used to come into the prison and teach us communication and various things, she sponsored me. And her name was Professor, what's her name? I'm so nervous, I can't even think of her name.
It's okay.
Franca Ferrari Bridges. It's a long one. I still talk to her to this day, so forgive me. But anyhow, she sponsored me. She made me write a proposal and all this stuff. She was really sweet. And I was able to get an associate's in psychology. I've lived off that degree. That was my lifeblood coming back out here. And I'm lucky enough now to have a great career, and I get to work in the community. I've been successful, and I know how important it is. Now, I remember spending my time in law libraries with other men, and all of us talking about doing advocacy when we get out here. This is something I've done. I'll call myself a moderate advocate, but I know how important it is, and it's a multi-tiered process. And it's good to see everybody here, and I see other organizations, but I think it's important as people with lived experience that we work together and speak up so that we can all come together and provide the services, whether it be in prison, people getting educated, or people coming home and then having the support network to be able to do the things that they want, because that's what I see. I see a lot of men coming home from prison and not having that support network or being able to find it. Right, so all the things that they dreamed about doing gets lost, and then they get sucked back into the negativity or whatever, the rat race or whatever you want to call it of life. So, I just wanted to speak from a lived experience, and I'm really happy to be here. So I appreciate everything you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Hi, my name is Dennis O'Neill, and I'm a head teacher within the Department of Corrections. And I was at Concord when Mneesha came along and helped roll out the program there. And I just wanted to affirm, I think, what Amy said about in helping folks transform their own lives. I think our institutions have been transformed as well, and the folks in the education division. I've been with the department 18 years, and so that stretches back, before there was college at Concord. And the transformation of the climate and the culture at that institution was really remarkable. There was definitely a decrease in, violence and kind of understanding. The officers and the staff saw how hard these guys were working. The rigor of the program, and it ushered in this new period where things that I never thought would get approved got approved, because a trust was formed between staff and the guys, the students, so that, they can have their books in their housing unit. They can have laptops. They can have, this, that, and the other thing that would have been an easy no once upon a time. But little steps, determination, and it's really helped to transform the department slowly, but progress, steady progress. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Dennis. Yeah, I just want to really appreciate you being here, and Mary Haynes, our colleague seated next to you, who is our main point person at DOC as well. Your willingness to be thought partners in this has been really critical. And what you said, I just want to lift up what you said, the way that college access has transformed the culture of the institution itself within the prison is really important, because I had the slide about prisons being criminogenic, right? People go in and they learn more crime, right? So the way that college access changes the culture of prison is significant within those institutions itself. We talk a lot about recidivism reduction and people being outside of prison after they have this college degree, but what it means for the daily life, both of incarcerated people and staff in the prison, is also significant. And I remember at our first commencement in 2022, one of our graduates in his commencement speech talked about, and it stayed with me because it was such a profound reflection, but he talked about how before being in college, the guys would be in the yard or they'd be in the gym and they'd be, talking about whatever, just like shooting the breeze, talking about whatever. And after college came in, the conversations in those spaces shifted. He said, we used to be bench pressing and talking about the latest gossip, and then we were debating Foucault. So the way that impacts the culture of a space over time also changes how people are using their time in the day-to-day, whether they are incarcerated for the long term or whether they're going to come home soon. And when we think about a deeply rooted and sustainable public safety, that's part of it. The institutional culture is part of it, both in the prisons and in our institutions of higher ed. So thank you for your role in supporting our work, especially in those early days when we didn't have the track record. Now people say EPI, and I get some nods of approval, like people know about us. I'm happy to say we're a good gold standard, both in the state and nationally. But you were with us in the very beginning when y'all didn't know who we were or if what we were proposing was going to work. So thank you for that. Let's see.
I just want to say that the guards in the prisons and jails need college also. They need it. They can do this work, they can leave and do something else. We need to have better spaces for people, and therefore these people need college too.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I don't want to give the spoiler for something that's not yet not yet public or approved, but we have been in conversation, and we're in the process of proposing a way to make an annual scholarship fund for correctional staff that work at MCI Norfolk, because we recognize that equitable access to education means for everyone, and not only for incarcerated people. We're also in the process of arranging financial aid workshops for correctional staff who either themselves or may have dependents or other family members navigating the college process, so trying to connect the resources that we have in terms of understanding financial aid to actually bring our financial aid staff to the prison to hold open workshops to be able to share that information back. So we did in early on try to pilot actually having classes that were for correctional staff, and that didn't really work for a variety of reasons. So we are thinking through how to best connect the dots on that, but thank you.
Hi, I'm Carol, and I'm also with Amy and Paretakers, and I mentor a student who's in the second cohort. And so first of all, I just want to thank you for this wonderful talk, the work that you're doing. I think now that I've visited, I can understand a lot more about all of the cogs and wheels and bureaucracy it takes to get this program running, and thanks to staff like you who help assist. And I just think it's been amazing, and as Amy said, I've been transformed so much, so thank you for that. The previous question was a perfect lead into mine, and your answer really negated the need for mine, but I don't know how prevalent this is, and I know there's some wonderful people on the correctional staff, but I also have heard a few different times that there is an animosity, college education in this country is not accessible for everyone. And so there have been questions directed at my mentee, why do you get a free education and I don't? And so I think it's wonderful that you have this new program on the horizon, but my question was going to be if there was any, not that you don't have enough on your plate, but if there was any thought or if we could brainstorm about a way to convey some of this information to some of the staff that serve there, but anyway.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think for me, it is a daily challenge to figure out what I can do concretely that is doable for me, given my humanness. You know, I have to like eat and sleep and do other things, and recognizing the sum total of needs in the world, right? Each of us has a role to play in trying to do social change work. And so there are programs that exist that are focused on correctional staff. There are programs that exist that focus on closing the gap for a number of different populations. Our program specifically is focused on incarcerated folks. So that is the gap that we're trying to close. But we need all of the programs. We need all of the gaps to be closed to live in a kind of world that is more equitable. I hope that this scholarship that I do hope will be successful in moving through its approvals will be part of that conversation. But we need other programs to address each of the specific populations. I think for me, again, though, it comes back to talking about things that are difficult, reducing stigma. So the resentment is logical, you know, and people have said this to me time and time again in conversations, like, why should this person get a free college education when I didn't break the law and I don't have one? Like, the problem is that college is not accessible, right? Higher education is not accessible. The problem is not this population has access and this population does not. It's that we live in an unfair world where goods are redistributed unfairly. So how do we address redistribution as a larger issue across a number of marginalized populations? And we can think of correctional staff as one of those populations. You know, how are those folks blocked from opportunities, and what has to shift to include them in conversations where they would have access to different perspectives, to education that might help them develop more critical views of the world, as it does for our students. So I think that is really important work. And I see what we're offering as, you know, it's one drop in the bucket, and we need all of your good ideas and lots of people leading different kinds of programs to address these issues of equity, because college access isn't equitable, although I'm happy in Boston, as we see with the Making Community College Free, you know, these are steps towards expanding access. How can we do that? And on a larger scale, we need more thought partners, and we welcome being thought partners in that. Thank you. I wanted to ask a question of the audience, going back again to Senator Eldridge's question about, like, what do we need to be doing? Because I know that there's, just looking around, I know there's a ton of expertise in this room in terms of what people need to be set up for success as returning citizens coming out of prison. And we haven't talked about housing, and we haven't talked about a number of the other factors that impact folks when they're coming home. So I just wanted to invite, if there's someone in the audience that wanted to speak to what are some of the other barriers that we face in Boston or in greater Boston, and what would we like our policymakers to do about it? Anybody interested in speaking to that?
Hi, I'm Bob Nesson. There are huge barriers to really re-entering and getting a job. The Corey laws are one. Lifetime parole, in particular, is a dramatic barrier. There are some other laws that prevent certain people who, with a record, from working on particular jobs, especially on the federal level. Like, you can't work at the airport if you have a criminal record in certain trades, for example. Is the state, and perhaps Senator Eldridge could address this, is the state doing anything to modify those kinds of rules? Thank you.
Yeah, pass the mic over.
Sure, I should have realized it might be answering some questions today. So thanks for your question. So there are bills to reform Corey. You know, there was some changes in the 2018 reform, but I agree they didn't go go far enough. And there's just major barriers, and I couldn't help but, when you stood up to comment, is in no disrespect to the DOC, but just an example of the barriers we have is that another college program, someone who's a returning citizen, was just trying to get access to go into the prison. So someone completely approved, part of another program, and he was not allowed into the DOC until I placed the call to the commissioner. So we really have a long way to go, including the DOC making changes, but the legislature ultimately has to make most of these changes, including around Corey reform. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I will say, because I know that we have a bunch, both of my own students, but other students in the room as well, and so I want to say to students who may be in the early stages of finding their civic voices, that figuring out how to advocate for whatever it is you believe in by calling your representative's office, by sending a handwritten card or showing up in person, and advocating for whatever issue you might feel connected to is an important way to have your voice heard. I know many folks in this room do that regularly, but for those of you that haven't, just making a plug that figuring out how to use your own voice to share those opinions is a really important civic tool. And so there are, in any given legislative cycle, there's going to be a number of bills that impact issues that you might care about. So whether it's the Corey background check bills, I know there's been a bill on raising the age at which people are convicted as adults, which is something that certainly impacts. EPI has a pretty high number of folks who are convicted or sentenced to their prison terms as either juveniles or very young adults. And what we know about brain science now is that people are not fully, the prefrontal cortex is not fully formed until age 25. So for folks who have made choices prior to that, is there a need to address the age of sentencing or address the Mattis decision in Massachusetts just provided a right to parole for people who were previously convicted of life without parole. So there are a lot of things happening legislatively to be aware of and figure out what you might want to connect with representatives about. Okay. The live stream. Yeah, where's our other mic? Oh, you know what, Betsy, can we grab this one? Okay, or come up and use this one.
Put a green lights on. Yeah, I just wanted to add to reentry, being formerly incarcerated and doing work with individuals that are incarcerated. There's no cookie-cut plan of how you help individuals reenter into society, plain and simple. And I think that's the issue that we all have bumped into when we came home. Including myself, there's long-termers, there's different crimes, there's different supports, and I think that we went at it for so many years of this is going to work for everybody when that's not the case. And I think also adding to that, it's people with the lived experience know the best. I hate saying it like that, but we know the obstacles that's going to happen when we come home. And I think that needs to be the driving force of reentry, no matter where it is. And I just want to add on to parole, to what you said. So there's a bill in right now to end juvenile and emerging adult lifetime parole. And when you first hear that, you think, oh, we're focusing on emerging adults and juveniles. No, I was an emerging adult. Cantel was a juvenile. Kevin was a juvenile. We're all adults now. Is that there's laws that affect us, that we committed crimes when we were kids, that now as adults we're on lifetime parole that's hindering us from multiple different things in life, right? So I think we should be more focused on stopping those barriers of individuals coming home, like you said, with parole, right? Because I think that's essential, right? I'm not trying to sit here and advocate for other things, but that is something that is important, right? So April 3rd, we have our first event trying to end that, trying to bring awareness of that, and I want to say one more thing because I feel like I'm talking a lot.
No, please, go ahead.
I want to say that, and I can do that a lot, so Kevin, you could shut me up, or Charles over here can when I am. But I think the purpose of it too is accountability too, right? We all have to be accountable if we commit a crime, and I'm all for that. We do our time. We even come home on parole, but when does that stop? When do you stop constantly living in fear? When can you live your life as a productive member of society, right? And the only way to do that is to take the chains off. Now, if you think about lifetime parole, especially when you committed a crime as a kid, all right, as a kid, that stays with you for the rest of your life, right? Like, when is that point where I serve my time and that doesn't affect me for the rest of my life? And I'm not talking about, and granted, you're doing at least 16 years. Like, that's the minimum of what you're doing. Some people do decades and decades, 30, 40, 50 years. And when we get to the point when the system becomes more harmful, that's like, I believe in restorative justice, but I also believe in transformative justice. This harm that's being committed in the system is not necessarily, and we can make an argument that it's not necessarily like meant to happen, right? But like, when you give individuals parole, that was meant for adults. That wasn't meant for people that committed their crime as kids. So I think if we make ourselves more aware of things and advocate for each other and work together, right, like you said, right, we could get more things done. But I appreciate this, and I appreciate the voice, but and I appreciate, you know, college, because it's important. And I like the question that you asked, and I'm sorry, it was hard for me to be like, I wanted to say something so bad, but it's like, the issue isn't why you getting free education. The issue is, why is education so expensive? Yeah. That's the issue. You know what I'm saying? And that's what like kind of frustrates me, is that we're sitting there pointing fingers at each other, right? No, it's unbelievably unaffordable for everybody to go to college. That's ridiculous. Like, come on, let's be real. And then now if somebody gets free college, you're like, hey, why are you getting free college? No, it's to be, why are we paying so much? But we don't think about that. But I just wanted to say that, and I'll end there. Appreciate you all. And yeah, I'll shut up.
Thank you so much. I think we'll have this be the last question, and then we'll transition.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dina Siegel. I'm a partaker's mentor for a man who is incarcerated at Norfolk. I'm also affiliated with the New England Innocence Project. And I wanted to say one thing across the board that would help every individual leaving prison is having a mass ID. Can you imagine leaving prison and not having an ID? You can't even go to the library. And a lot of people need to go to the library to use the computers to job search, because everything is online now. It's a true barrier to reentry. So mass ID, everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I had said that was the last, but we'll let one more.
Howdy, I'm Gia. I work at Emerson, and I was just thinking, and I think you said a lot of what I was going to say, but I was thinking about the collateral consequences of being incarcerated and how your sentence just doesn't end once you're out. And I used to work in reentry, and I would have folks who would be going to school, and there would be a required night class, and they couldn't take a night class because they would have to be back to their sober house by. And so thinking about, getting away from that cookie cutter approach where everyone needs the same thing, everyone needs the same types of structure, and really thinking about what people need to thrive and how they can take some agency over their lives, and what are the other barriers we put in the way of people once they're out as well.
Thank you. I think what I would encourage all of us to do is educate ourselves about both the legal constraints and opportunities that exist to do structural reform, and also find the individual ways in which we can harness our own talents to play a role. And if we do both of those together, so some people might focus on parole reform and addressing ending lifetime parole because we see firsthand the way that impacts and restricts people's lives, and other people might want to use their filmmaking talents to make a documentary film, and we're going to see tomorrow with our film festival the many ways that these stories can be visually represented, and other people are going to find different ways to use those talents. But when we are complacent on any issue, when we don't speak up on any issue, then the issue continues to operate based on someone else's vision. And I say to my students semester after semester, people make policy, and we are people, so let's make policy, right? Let's figure out how to be involved in policy making. So thank you for coming together today. I want to make just a couple announcements before everyone scatters. The first is we now have a break for 25 minutes until our 12 p.m. Keynote by Raiko Hillier. Please come back or stay if you're able to, because it's going to be amazing. We do have lunch in the back. My request, and I'm going to say this multiple times throughout the day, my request is if you're a student on the meal plan with unlimited meals, don't eat our conference food. Because we want to make sure that there's enough for all of the folks that are not students on the unlimited meal plan. So if you're here as an external guest or if you're a student not on the meal plan or any other situation where it would benefit you to have a sandwich, please do. But if you're going to head over to the cafeteria, have the ability to head to the cafeteria and tap in, please do that instead. Otherwise, all of our programming today and tomorrow is free and it's open to the public, so please join us. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation in all of the many roles that you serve. We really appreciate it. Take some time to mix and mingle if you can and get to know each other, okay? See you at noon.